Welcome and thank you for joining our sixth session in our Higher Education Dialogue series today. My name is Ayşen Güven and I work as the Director Education for the British Council in Turkey, and I'm delighted to be moderating this panel. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, I'd just like to give you a little bit of information about the series, which was formed in response to the common challenges universities have been facing globally in times of the pandemic. And we're delighted to create this platform for higher education experts and leaders to connect with the UK and universities across the world. And our session today is also special for us because it is also part of the British Council's Going Global online event. And you will hear later the audience, and I think we have truly become global with our webinar today. In this higher education series, we have covered a variety of themes so far, varying from future models of online learning, assessment, how universities engage with and motivate students. But there was one theme that has been raised in every webinar so far, and it has been raised as a recurring challenge, which was quality assurance. And I believe most of you would agree with me that assuring the quality of higher education provision has been a major challenge for higher education institutions and national policymakers before the pandemic. But the sudden switch to emergency online teaching has certainly exacerbated this need to discuss and focus on it even further. And let me just share you that today, this event is also special for us because I have heard that we have over 1,300 registrations from over 100 countries, which I think is an indication how important this theme is for all of us who have joined us today. And just to let you know about the webinar background as well, I will be referring to some of my colleagues who are based in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Serbia to help us follow the chat box, the question and answer box. And we have actually, for those of you who have registered earlier, you must have received a pre-online survey already. And I would like to ask my colleague Summer to share that with us. And thank you again for actually initiating a thought-provoking result of the survey. Summer, can you just comment on the survey?
Yes. Hi, Ayşen. Hi, everyone. Yes, so we asked you, audience, what is the major issue in your view that needs to be addressed from a quality assurance perspective in the current situation? From your answers, we can see the usual suspects make, have a high number of choices. So teaching and learning environment, curriculum and teaching materials, and also assessment. And of course, in the current situation, delivery of online lesson is an important factor as well. But I think what's most interesting to me is, look, teamwork with other students have been rated by you as an important factor to be considered as well. So I think these are the things that we will hopefully try to address during the session today. And I'm sure Ayşen's got lots of good questions for our panel.
Thank you, Summer. Thank you. I'm sure we will be referring to this data that has actually emerged from our audience today. So I'd like to first of all introduce our panel today, our panel of our distinguished speakers from the UK, Georgia and Turkey, to explore how universities can ensure quality teaching online. And if I may introduce our speakers, Professor Diana Lorillard from the University College London. Hi, Diana. Douglas Blackstock, the Chief Executive of the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK. Hi, Douglas. And Professor Muzaffer Elmas, who is the President of the Turkish Higher Education Council. Hello, Muzaffer Hocam.
Hello. Hello.
And Irma Girtselidze, Head of Quality Assurance Office at the Tbilisi State University. Hi, Irma.
Hello.
I think all of us probably, I can hear us saying that 1 hour is probably impossible to cover quality assurance in one webinar. And again, from the questions we have received from our audience, we have, I think, received over 100 questions, which we have tried to categorize around some themes so that we can pose them later. This session won't be, I think, enough for us. We are aware of that. So we will be focusing on some very specific questions, but we also hope that this will be the beginning of what we think will be a much longer discussion on quality assurance of emergency online teaching. And what we want to focus on today is actually a very specific question, because there are some common facts we know about the pace in which institutions have to switch to remote online teaching, the technology issues related to it. But what we want to focus today is really to pin down perhaps the biggest challenge of each institution that's represented today, that they have faced to ensure quality online teaching in times of the pandemic, and what they have done about it. So we will try to focus on that question. And before I hand it over to my first speaker here, just a couple of reminders about the format and how we can engage with you even more during the webinar. So, like the other sessions, this session will be recorded and shared after the session. And if you have missed the previous ones, please go to the link we have shared earlier. Each speaker will have about 3 to 5 minutes initially to present their context. And I think, again, we have a variety of representation here, institutional level and national level, which is, I think, very important. The second half, in the second half, we would like to focus more on the questions that you will be asking during the webinar and that we have collated together, actually before the webinar. For this to happen, I would like to invite you, please, to go to the question and answer button and type in your question that you would like to be addressed to the panelists. And please, for the others, if you feel you would like that question to be answered, you have to like it so that my colleagues can pick out those questions and we can ask them to our panelists at the end. And before, again, I hand over to our first speaker, we have another poll about a more specific question as to our audience today. Summer, my colleagues will be sharing it now, and we would like to invite you to answer that, because it will give us a bit more information as to who is actually online today. So without further ado, over to you, Diana.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I thought I think Summer's going to share my slides with you in just a second. I thought the questions that the British Council put to us, the quality challenges of online learning and how we address them, were very apposite. So I'm going to go through those by reflecting on what we've been doing over the past couple of months or so to do exactly this. And of course, my earlier career was spent almost entirely working on online learning, but this is a different phase we're in now. So next slide, please, Summer. And what I've tried to do is to distill my reflections into just 6 basic principles of how we address these challenges. And the first one is the critical one, really, because nothing can happen without it. It really is the sine qua non. Unless you have digital access with your students, it's not going to work. So we have to make sure that in every university, our digital education support center, whatever kind of organization that is actively seeking to find out what the problems are and then responding as promptly as they can, offering workarounds, offering advice and guidance to students who are having difficulty with decent broadband access and so on. And with many students, of course, they may have no device of their own, and the university has to take active steps to help them. The second point on academic staff development, this is an incredibly difficult time for teachers because it's a very unfamiliar way of teaching for many people. So the best we can do for them is to provide them with support as an online professional development course, not too long, not too complicated, very practice oriented, going from the very basics of how you get in touch with your students and the best way of thinking about design, right through to being able to make really the optimal use of all the kinds of digital tools available to them. Very important that they use the university virtual learning environment, whatever that is, because that's what their students will be learning from. So the staff must experience what it's like to be doing online learning. And so if you're running an online learning course for them, then they will have that experience. And it's amazing how many university academics have not had that experience. It's the first thing to do, is to get that experience. And in that course, there should be social learning for those academic staff to learn from each other, to share their problems and concerns, and also to share their solutions. Then mixing synchronous and active asynchronous learning is important. A lot of people focus on trying to do the lecture video, which is because that's the way you think about working with your students, but really keep those videos very short. What you really need is a mix of both methods, much more active learning. And I think this session here will be a kind of model of keeping the input short, but the discussion much more balanced than it normally is. And then orchestrating how your students learn to support each other, because the time they spend together online is very important. So you spend as much time designing that as you would if you were running a class and you're having small group sessions and you think about how to set that up. You have to do that for most of what the students are doing when you're not there. And that means using things like peer review processes where they review something like maybe an essay outline or something. They review each other's work according to your rubrics. And then they learn a lot through that process. And then the teacher gets a much better quality essay as a result. Now, all of that has to be orchestrated online, using WhatsApp groups to discuss issues which they then want to raise with the teacher. Next slide, please, Summer. And so then the next 3 points are about planning for a digital future. This is not just for now. This is a watershed moment. It's going to change the way we think about the future of education. So as we plan this emergency, urgent opportunity, think about the long term at the same time, because there will be a long-term payoff from this. The very big upfront investment of staff time to make this happen. But that means that that's done. That kind of design is there. And then next year it needs to be updated, yes, but it's not the same kind of investment again. So you have to look in the long term to be able to see the balance of how you're using your staff time. Trust the teachers is very important because they do know how to be innovative, creative, and committed to their students. They won't know about that in the context of digital tools necessarily, but that's the kind of support they need. Discover how to turn their innovation and creativity into a digital context. And then we have to understand the true workload costs, as I was just saying. This is one of the most important issues. Academics are so overloaded. They're overloaded because we underfund research, and their teaching is never calibrated to really fit the amount of time it truly takes. So this investment of upfront time that we now need is going to need very careful planning, and they have to trust the universities that they will help them in that. So this will take some investment. And I think it's valuable to think of this as an investment in the long term, enabling the university to become a massive community knowledge building project of how to optimize the way in which we're using digital technologies to improve the quality and also the equality of higher education, because there are advantages in what we can do. Final slide, please. Summer. And so finally, you will get these slides. So those are some links to what we've developed over the past few weeks, a course on FutureLearn in English on how to teach online, and a course in Arabic on the Ajak platform, also in, it's called Teaching Online. So I hope those might be of some use to those of you who need to do something urgently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana. I'm sure most of our audience will agree about supporting teachers as one of the major priorities. It was also one of the questions raised in the pre-webinar, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to that. And another question that was actually raised, a request that came from the audience, was about sharing some guidelines and examples. Thank you again for the links that you have shared. I'd like to, before I move on to our next speaker, I'd like to ask Summer whether we have the results of our poll regarding the audience.
Yes, we do. So we'll be sharing that now.
Okay, so a big representation from university management. I think, yeah. That is very useful to see. Thank you, Summer. So I think we've got university leadership, academicians and researchers, and some student representatives, which is very nice to see. As I think those of you who have joined us last week, we had one student representative from the Turkish Higher Education Quality Council. I think the students are always the best feedback providers. Thank you. Just before, again, I move on to our second speaker, we would like to ask the same question to our audience as well, to again see whether they have other challenges that maybe our panelists won't mention today. So, Summer, if I can kindly ask you to put up the second poll about what they consider to be the biggest challenge and what they have done so far. Thank you. I'd like to move on to our second speaker now, Professor Muzaffer Elmas, who is the president of the Council of Turkish Higher Education Quality Council. And over to you, Professor Elmas.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks to British Council for this webinar. 208 higher education institutions, 8 million higher education students, and 175,000 academicians in our country. We are a very big family. Higher Education Quality Council and universities decide to...
Professor Elmas. Summer, can we move on to the Yes, thank you. Thank you. Sorry for this.
Slide. Yeah, next slide. Okay. Higher Education Council in Turkey and universities decide to do online training and online exams for this spring semester. Two types of university emerge here. The first group consists of universities that have provided online education already for years, and the second group consists of universities that have not previously applied online courses on program or so few. Universities use different methods according to their infrastructure and number of students. Curriculum and course materials prepared for face-to-face environment were transferred online. Some problems our online education, internet infrastructure, access to internet technology, quality and quantity of course materials, inexperiences of academicians and students in distance education. But most of the time, this problem are quickly resolved from Higher Education Council and universities. This process was managed dynamically in our country. No surprise here. We just have to wake up from our sleep. COVID-19 brought to term emergency distance education during the crisis period and appears to be the most reasonable option under this condition. For quality assurance of online education consists of program design, academic staff training, exams and homework review, and good learning management system, LMS. Turkey IT infrastructure quality close to the European average. Online exam safety is a problem in distance education. We were able to partially solve this. Everyone learned a lot from this process. I believe we are stronger now. 80% of students prefer formal education. It is difficult to make prediction about the future in complex and rapidly changing world. What is important today is to have a plan for all possible conditions. Otherwise, every innovation will be a show. To plan the future education with all habits is impossible. However, making a general decision not correct in this time of crisis. Let's not be like this picture. Let's complete this picture. Academician training and infrastructure and others. Next slide, please. Ensure quality assurance is distance learning has become the top priority on our agenda. The institution accreditation and program accreditation schedule were postponed to October. We set a working group to study the components that are required to establish a quality distance education system and the scope of the components. Accreditation criteria already update according to distance learning process. Document of distance education and quality assurance system in higher education has been published on our website. Our council closely monitors the decisions on site visit made by international quality assurance agencies during the pandemic. Our council, we observed that agencies have got flexibility in external evaluation and accreditation practices during the uncertain time, while some other agencies attempt to conduct virtual site visits. In the following period, we may have to perform some of our accreditation activities online. During COVID-19, we can categorize external evaluation and accreditation activities into two parts. We are planning virtual site visit with limited face-to-face interaction. Campus visit, face-to-face visit will be focus group, including students, academicians, and physical infrastructure and learning environment. Approximately 70% online and 30% face-to-face site visit. Yeah, thank you for this. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Elmas. And I'm sure we will come back to some of the issues you've touched upon later, because we have a lot of questions about new regulations and assessment issues, and I'm sure that Douglas will also be referring to those because there have been some questions around those areas. So before I actually go over to Douglas, sorry, just out of curiosity, because I cannot check the question and answer, any interesting challenges that have been raised, Summer?
Yes, there were lots coming in, Aishan, in the chat box. So I would encourage the audience to keep them coming. So what is your experience so far, you know, in regards to the biggest challenge that you have had? I mean, there are some about, you know, when it comes to practical subjects, you know, how does that work with online delivery? And also there are some specific questions for the Higher Education Council in Turkey and also for QAA, and talking about foreign participants in local universities in Turkey and in Georgia as well. And of course, our favorite subject, assessment. How is that going to be addressed through the online process?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Summer. I mean, it's nice to see lots of overlaps. We know some of the questions we are leaving for the second half of the webinar. Thanks for the summary. And without further ado, over to you, Douglas.
Thank you, Aisha. And I'm getting told there's poor network quality, so hopefully you can still hear me. Please tell me if you can. Colleagues, of course, we don't do any teaching and learning. We're a national agency for quality assurance and quality enhancement. So what I talk about is one, how we responded, but how we worked with the sector and what we're picking up across the sector. And it's not moving on. Oh, goodness me. Here we go. And we responded in a number of ways. We've working with the sector in response to government restrictions. We have gone from producing initial guidance on how to respond to the pandemic and the emergency shift online through to guidance about next academic year. And in between there are a range of resources. And the thing about those, they are not rules set by QA. They are a capturing of the practice and the richness and diversity of practice that has been developing in autonomous institutions. Of course, Diane has already mentioned about moving to online and moving at pace, and the principles that we certainly feel are important is it needs to be online learning, digital learning, virtual learning, distance learning needs to be designed and structured carefully. We've out of the emergency and into long-term planning, and you need to be clear about how the students' learning outcomes are going to be met, right through to how are they going to be assessed. One example I would use is Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen developed online teaching strategies in partnership with students and used a pulse survey to assess how students were responding. The Open University has developed an online model for tutors on creating a sense of belonging for students. Our International Partners Forum that we held with 25 agencies raised a whole range of challenges about consistency, from digital poverty right through to whether in some countries the infrastructure exists to move to digital delivery and assessment. Our second principle is about accessibility for students. Not every student has the same kind of access, or necessarily the initial skills, and how does that work across a range of diverse programs that have to be delivered in different ways. So we have to think about diversity and approaches to learning and teaching. How do you work with disabled students? How do you deal with students? So we've who don't have access to technology. Some institutions have loaned student laptops or given them hardship funds. Others have used sign language as part of their delivery online. And the third principle I'd say in terms of things we've learned is about promoting academic integrity. And I see there's been several questions. There is a global phenomenon known as essay mills. People, third-party essay writers trying to encourage students to cheat in higher education. So we need to build in integrity around assessment processes to avoid things like contract cheating. So we need to support students, inform about the risks, but also think about design and assessment in ways that it makes it difficult for someone to, for example, suggest that they are a third person sitting. And then the last thing in terms of, I'm sorry, I've moved on to the wrong slide, but never mind, is that it's really, really important that even if you don't have access to all of the software in all countries, if you don't have yet of all of the access, you build around systems and processes that are effective for your circumstances. So someone has asked, is there different quality assurance to online as opposed to physical on site? Actually, fundamentally, there isn't. It starts with course design. It starts with, it includes the pedagogy, it includes design and the methods of delivery, there's methods of student engagement, the methods of assessment and providing feedback. What you can't, of course, is necessarily include all the social aspects. So I think that what I've tried to do through this is you'll see a number of links to documents that QA have published. And if there's any specific questions, I've got colleagues who are on the call who'll post direct links to individual documents. Thanks, Aishan.
Thank you, Douglas. There are some specific questions related to QAA, and I may leave some of those to the end if that's okay, but we will definitely come. I think we are getting some of the recurring themes, and again, thank you for the links and the guidelines. I'm sure our audience will be finding that very useful. If I can now move on to our last panelist, Irma. Over to you, and with the perspective from Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, thank you for giving us this good opportunity to share what we have achieved and what challenges we have within the institutions. I represent the oldest and the biggest university of Georgia, Tbilisi State University, with 22,000 students. Actually, my kind of concern or my speech will be directed to external quality assurance mechanisms as well as internal quality assurance. In terms of externally, what we used to be having, in terms of law on higher education, we didn't have anything on distant learning. There were some notes on conducting e-learning within the courses, but that didn't cover PhD, and that was just supposed to be within the country, not from outside. And in terms of quality assurance standards, actually, we didn't have it because actually we were moving toward that. In terms of the site visits and accreditation and authorization of the processes, most of them either were moved online or they were postponed. For instance, the accreditation for doctoral study programs in some cases, but mostly for medical education, we moved it. I mean, the government and NCQE, which is the national agency, they decided that it would be much better to postpone the accreditation of these programs. We are part of WFME, so with the recommendation for the next year when we are on campus. Actually, on terms of external quality assurance, our agency somehow provided us with some kind of regulations, not regulations, but translations of ENQA documents and resources collected, which was really a good support. And also the government announced the emergency situation and the regulations kind of followed them. But that was after the institutions themselves started moving forward in the beginning of March, and all these regulations somehow followed us a bit later. In terms of internal quality assurance, actually, what we have to say, we didn't have a kind of pre-existing experience on that. Yes, there were some courses on the Moodle, and there were some e-resources and library resources and many others, but this was kind of supportive material to our traditional kind of teaching and learning. And we had challenges on institutional levels in terms of regulations, and then curricular type of challenges we had to overcome, and personnel in terms of staff and the students, definitely. We transformed the curricular in two major ways. The first was we transformed the curricular, some courses that were more theoretical, they moved from the very beginning, so that we somehow changed the curricular, but actually with containing and with keeping the prerequisite for the courses and the learning outcomes fulfillment. And within the courses also some kind of lecturing came first, so that the students and the staff adjusted to this online teaching and learning, and then seminars came in. In terms of labs and the skill-based kind of courses, we somehow thought that it would be much easier for us to conduct them when everything is safer, and Georgia actually in this case is one of the safest country. We just have 800 confirmed cases and really 2 or 3 cases each day. So actually very, very high safety, and we think that this could be done now in summer. At the same time, we transformed the assessment system in 2 different ways. The first was somehow the ratio. We use ECTS credit system, and we have this continuous assessment, which means that formative assessment is having a bigger part or bigger portion within the overall assessment. So what we have done, we did that the summative assessment or the final examinations have the bigger part right now, and change the assessment forms like more open book kind of exercises and more essays we have, and papers and the test that could be used during the final examinations, and not only. Actually, this somehow was supported by the regulations, and we did several handbooks and tutorials for our staff and as well as for the students in terms of supporting them with synchronic as well as asynchronic kind of methods to be used during their studies or teaching. And actually we did, I represent quality assurance office of my university, and we did some kind of guiding principles or elaborated some kind of guiding principles for quality assurance of e-learning. Apart from the regular studies, we somehow said that it is very important to have learning management and resources, autonomy, accountability, and academic freedom should be kind of present in all these provision, and taking into account that they are really matched with academic integrity and student support, diversity and inclusion, and specificities of the courses in terms of content, assessment, and methods. From the very beginning, we started this asynchronous and synchronous kind of provision of the courses, and this semester, approximately 2,700 courses we are chosen by the students. So moving all these courses into online with this non-existing prior experience was really a very big kind of challenge, and the professors and the students were really very supportive. And we have done analysis prior, and we did the student surveys for the students and staff, and somehow up to 3,000 students kind of participated in these surveys, and we analyzed the needs and then gave the administration and the staff the correspondent recommendations to what could be done. And we try to monitor the process, and one QA tool we will have at the end of the day, while finalizing our semester, is that we will conduct the survey again, checking how it went and what were the major challenges, because we have to plan the strategy for long-term perspective as well as short-term perspective, just in case we start the same in September, or we see that there are lots of opportunities here with online teaching, and it could be still capture the experience we have. And at the same time, we will see the student achievement and kind of analyze the student achievement so that we see how well the learning outcomes were achieved. And the last point was capacity building for staff and students, which is really continuous. Like for the month of May, 700 staff participated in the 17 trainings we conducted, and up to 600 students on mostly on the issues that would support them to write their theses when they finalize their semester. And we issued some tutorials and handbooks and trainings. We asked for trainings our international partners, and I have to emphasize that this solidarity and peer kind of support was really very important, because our partners supported us a lot, those who have prior experience in e-learning, and they were really very supportive. San Diego University, for instance, which is our good partner, and we conduct the trainings on e-learning delivery, online assessment and feedback, and content development, and as long as trainings on technology issues and many others. So the major problem really stays inclusion and the students who do not still have the equipment or the internet to join. So this could be also talked about a bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sure these reflections are shared in many institutions. I'd like to, we were going to move on to the learning points from the panelists, but I have received some of the questions that have the biggest votings. And if you don't mind, I'd like to pose some of these to our panelists. And one of them is around a rather provocative one maybe, but who should be responsible for ensuring the quality of remote education, quality assurance agencies or universities themselves?
I can answer that simply from my point of view. It's very clear, and particularly for those of us who's based in Europe, the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance start with internal quality assurance. The responsibility sits with autonomous institutions to develop their programs, to deliver their programs, of course in line with any expectations and standards. And our role is perhaps external verification, if you like, that and in our case it's that students are receiving good and positive outcomes, but fundamentally institutions should be designing programs and delivering them.
Thank you, Douglas. There's one specific question to Professor Elmas, which is about virtual accreditation processes. How do you envisage that happening? And is that something that's happening in the QAA as well, Douglas? Or that's maybe a future direction? So first over to Muzaffer Bey. You're on mute, Professor Elmas.
Yeah. We have designed our virtual accreditation process in 2 steps. 1 step, 2 days, and for online only, and self-assessment report and quality commission, and other face-to-face inside visit, 1.5 day, and for students and for academicians, for other staff, focus group and stakeholders, maybe, and feedback report. Yeah, the planning. Next month we work is system of one university.
Thank you. Douglas, is there a virtual accreditation? What do you think about it?
Not virtual and blended.
Okay.
And face-to-face.
I think, look, there's the reality of the emergency when physical visits to institutions weren't possible, and we've largely postponed activities, but in some circumstances where it had to be completed, we're undertaking virtual visits, but giving teams the capacity to reserve judgment or caveat the judgment that if there is insufficient evidence to come to a final conclusion, they'll make a provisional judgment and visit when it's physically possible. But there is a big question for quality agencies now. What is the environmental impact? What is the financial cost of teams of people travelling around the country and the world to conduct such site visits? And maybe we should move, as Musafa says, to a blended approach that allows you to do lots of the evidence gathering in advance, lots of conversations in advance, and restrict a site visit to be focused on key critical questions you want to explore. So it could be positive, a shift can be positive for the environment and reduce the burden on institutions.
Thank you, Douglas. I think we have another question which I want to put to the panelists, because there is also going to be a poll question about it. It was something we wanted to find out, and it's one of the highest rated questions, and it's about the satisfactions of the students. So how do we measure student satisfaction rate in terms of the quality of education they're receiving? And the poll that we have is actually related to that as well, Summer. In your view, are students happy with the quality provision in the current context? So I'd like to pose that question to the audience as a yes/no question, but also to the panelists.
You mean we can talk when we like?
Yeah. Whoever wants to go first. I can see that Yeah, go ahead, Diana.
I have a quick response, which is to say that inevitably, I don't see how they can be extremely satisfied with what's happening currently, because it's had to happen so fast, and we have not had the time to be able to learn and offer what's good. But there are advantages to online learning, and I hope that at least some academics in this switch will have been able to take advantage of these. We might come on to talk about one or two of those maybe later on, but give us a little time. It's not going to be great initially, but this is a very important time to learn how to do this better, and for the future, make it really good alongside conventional teaching.
Thank you, Diana. Yes, Irma?
Yeah, I would probably add up to what Diana said. When we first conducted the survey, the students, after 2 weeks, they have started. The students, some 60% of the interviewees said that it was engaging and kind of inspiring. We will do the survey again after we finish and finalize the semester. But I do agree with Diana. This is learning by doing, actually, what we are doing right now. And that will not be perfect. We hope that it will be perfect after some time, but not now. And we assume that we have to master it, us, the administration, professors, and the students, and somehow adjust to the environment we are living right now. And at the same time, the stress, this was not just done in a very calm and relaxed environment. We did everything kind of in a very big hurry.
Yes, thank you, Irma. Yes, Douglas?
Yeah, sure. Look, students aren't necessarily going to be ecstatic, but my perception is that students are accepting of, in our case, a national, but also a global emergency. None of us has lived through a global pandemic like this, and so I think the people that students are reasonable. I think it's particularly continuing students as they move on to next year, and new students as they enroll this year want to know what the experience is going to look like, and can you replicate all the things that they perhaps had been expecting when they signed up. But you know, when you can't use public transport, when offices are closed, when factories are closed, you know, there's a sense of realism. I think that most students are pragmatic. And I'd sum it up with our National Union of Students said to me in a meeting, we stay online until it's safe.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there are lots of questions about student motivation, engagement, but I think we have covered those a little bit. So I'd like to move on maybe to the summary bit. Just maybe invite each panelist with the second half of the webinar, learning points so far and what's ahead for your institution. And because I want to allocate a little bit more time to assessment questions, which there are two groups of questions that I also would like to raise, maybe if you can share the major learning points and the way forward. And who would like to start? Muzaffer, Professor.
Okay.
Yeah, Elmas?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay. If the pandemic does not end and still goes on, student dormitory and classroom might not be physically sufficient due to social distance, new term. There might be different option here. Some courses are online in the university and some courses are face-to-face. Not all courses may be online. Using the blended system can be important next fall semester. Maybe, I don't know nowadays, but first of all, it is important to raise individual with skills and competencies for students. It is important to develop mechanism to achieve the distance education. Decision can be made on the basis of lessons. We should guarantee the same learning outcomes in online education. We have to make our plans accordingly. It will be possible with an integrated system measure whether students accrue the targeted learning outcomes in program or course. Student motivation is very important, but not only online education, student motivation not possible, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Elmas. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Irma?
I would speak up about the kind of perspective from the university perspective again. We are thinking about having the strategy for online teaching and learning, short term and long term, and anticipate problems like different problems like financial, human, technical, curriculum wise problems, and at the same time trying to allocate the resources. And these resources, what has to be done in the very nearest future, this is continue the capacity building for staff and the students and IT infrastructure to make it more system kind of synchronized, or to make it function in a way we do not take very much diversity, what we have done during this semester, and library resources so that everything is there online once the students need them, and pedagogical changes. Definitely go on with the curriculum and observe what we have done so far could be continued, or some changes should be done there. So this is all doing and observing and asking, and then once we have the results, changing again and going on this PDCA cycle. Finances again stay the challenge, because we don't really know what will be from September on. Will the students be able to pay for themselves? This could be an issue, and at the same time, this challenge of inclusion, which I have said, we tried our best to somehow support students in terms of giving them hard copies whenever they are available, or allowing them to use their gadgets, what they have. This is big state university, and we are not able to give everybody the computers or the laptops, definitely. So we think that this is the kind of challenge that not only the university but the government should think for the future. So this is anticipating some kind of challenges and giving perspectives. Definitely we will think preserving some kind of achievements we have, because this was really huge opportunity for us, and anticipate the challenges or the problems for the next semester and after.
Thank you, and thank you for raising again that this will take time and capacity building. I'm sure every institution will go through this, and pedagogical questions were amongst the most that were raised by the audience about how do I manage classroom, my lesson planning, so, you know, all kinds of pedagogy questions we've had. But I'd like to move on to Diana as for the learning points and the way forward.
Well, I think the learning points I summarized really in my presentation. I mean, those are the 6 main things I wanted to say, but just following on from what Irma was saying, I also want to inject a kind of emotional point here about the enthusiasm that we should be feeling for this opportunity, because there are ways in which online learning can be advantageous. You know, it's not just about the disadvantages of online. We may do our best to try and emulate what we do in face-to-face, but we should do better than what we do in face-to-face. Many years ago, I did a comparative study of a face-to-face tutorial and an online tutorial, which was asynchronous. And the comparison of teacher talk to student talk in the face-to-face tutorial was 9:1. 9 teacher minutes to 1 student minute. In the asynchronous tutorial, it was the exact opposite. Because there was so much more time. There isn't that limitation of time. Students could write a whole paragraph, which would have taken, 3 minutes to say. A student never spoke for 3 minutes at a time in a face-to-face tutorial. Those kinds of things are advantageous. And some of the questions which have come through have been about the loss of peer learning. That shouldn't be a loss. There's more opportunity for peer learning. You know, the kinds of things that you can help your students do when you're not there. Construct that. It does take more design time from the teacher, but there are so many ways in which students can support each other, learn from each other, and you can orchestrate that process and then hear back from them what they got. So I want to, I think, inject a bit of positivity into this as well, to say there are wonderful things you can do with digital. Don't just try to emulate. Do not do the 50-minute lecture. That's not what Zoom's for. You know, you do a 5-minute lecture, and then you have other kinds of dialogue. And that one-to-one teaching tutorial you can still do. The masterclass you can still do. You just have, you know, like we have here, we have 5 people in a panel, and we talk among ourselves in response to all the other participant questions. That's a pretty good job of interactivity with 1,000 people.
Yeah, Diana, thank you. Because amongst the questions we have received, as you said, there was a bit of skepticism over as to whether we can really quality assure online provision. And I think from what you're saying, it means a different perspective, looking at it from the positive way. And
a bit of evidence for that is that I was at the Open University for 20 years, and invariably the Open University came top in the National Student Survey for quality of student support. They invested.
Thank you. Before I move on to Douglas, sorry Douglas, I just heard the poll results are ready. So can we see them somewhere? So are your students happy with the quality provision in the current context? That's exact. I think that's what. Any surprises, or is that what you would have expected?
That's not too bad.
Not too bad, I agree. Yes.
We normally wouldn't ask yes/no questions to evaluate, would we?
Yes. Normally, Douglas, that's true. Normally. Okay, over to you then. Thank you, Summer. Thank you, and thank you for the audience for participating in the poll.
If I may share again, just in terms of my last slide, so that people can see the report that I'm going to refer to. Over the last month, I've had conversations with 150 or more vice chancellors and pro vice chancellors learning and teaching across UK higher education, and the report that you see there, looking forward to next year, is built on what they've told us about what they've learned in this period, the way they've been engaging with their students, and the plans that they've been put in to address things that have come up in some of the questions about what is. I have a problem with using the word online, yet I've kept doing it myself. It can mean lots of different things to different people. And I thought Diana's first slide was, I think it was the first one, fantastic, and setting out the range of options that you've got available. So we're going to be developing a taxonomy of approaches to digitally enabled distance delivery. There's a whole range of issues around digital poverty, and it's not just for students. Actually, staff who live in remote areas might not have great internet access. There's in the possibility of different types of qualifications and micro credentials if economic recession comes, and issues like that, the student experience and how you can shoot. And the thing that stood out to us across this is the institutions that appear to be doing this well are those that are adopting principles. And we've adopted 4 principles, we think, for the sector. The first is that return to on-site activity has to be secure for staff and safe for staff and students. Degree awarding bodies need to maintain quality and standards. You have to engage with students in the planning and changes to delivery to teaching assessment, and scenarios are flexible and responsive as the pandemic changes. I think they're all really, really important things, and that includes all types of provision, including TNE. And my last thing about, for colleagues who are sceptical about delivering in a way that's different from physical to face-to-face. In the UK, maybe it's we had the experience, but for over 100 years, the University of London has delivered its external or international programme. I said earlier in the warm-up, Nelson Mandela got his degree that way. And look at what he went on to do. The Open University, established by the government in the 1960s, largely delivered by radio programmes and television programmes. It's just a different mechanism. And the thing that stands out to me, where everyone appears to be moving in the UK, is to blended or hybrid or dual approaches. I've heard colleagues talking about, okay, let's really talk about student-centred learning and let the students drive the way they're going to learn. Yeah. What about personalising the learning more using different approaches? Other colleagues saying, give students a chance to, in a dual mode, switch in and out of different ways in the way that suits them. Because I mean, the reality is, I think we all have to accept this disease is going to be with us for quite a while, and that we can't be seen as holding back the chance of students to develop now rather than wait for a year or two. Yeah,
yeah, that's probably what Muzaffer Bey's picture was also about, right? You don't wait for the excellent completion of it, but yes, thank you. Thanks, Douglas. I'm conscious of time, and we will obviously discuss how we can share all these questions that have been, shared with us. I'd really like to thank our audience. There was a lot about assessment, maybe a final comment, or if any of the panelists would like to comment on it. I think we've covered most of the areas that we have collected from our audience, except for assessment, maybe a little bit, which comes out as one of the major concerns. There were questions about what's the best online assessment, what about validity, security, all those assessment pack questions. Can I just can I invite one comment on that who would like to respond to assessment issues? Is this an issue for support again with training implications? I don't know, going back to all that what we have been discussing.
Sorry, I have to go. Ashana, and thank you so much. Wonderful questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana.
Thank you.
Aishan, I don't know if the red box. Well, the red box is on me now. So
you're fine now.
I think there is a number of things that have come through this discussion. Is for staff the time. The reskilling if you need to be, the adoption of different methods, and so your own staff development in institutions has to start thinking about. But there's there are programs out there and there are organisations that support this. In terms of assessment and integrity, I think I mentioned earlier is really important. And we've been saying whether it's these new methods of assessment digitally or online or old ways, you still have to vary your assessment practices. So that you create the opportunity for students to demonstrate in different ways that they've learned. And we have, I think we put a link on already. We have produced some guidance on that, which I think would be useful for colleagues to read, and there will be more out in the future.
Thank you.
I mean, we have made all our stuff freely open to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I think Diana had to leave. I wasn't able to thank her, but I just noticed before I close this webinar, I was sent one comment which got the highest likes. Distance learning can be awful, but so can be face-to-face teaching. Equally, both can be excellent if done properly. So the arbiter of quality is not the mode of delivery, it is the pedagogy that makes the difference. And I think that is a nice closure actually to the webinar, which brings us back to pedagogy, training and learning really. And I'd like to thank our participant who put that very nice comment. I really think that is a nice way of summarizing it. I am conscious of time, so I'd like to thank everyone, our audience, our panelists for their invaluable contributions. And right after this webinar, we will be actually discussing how we can maintain this interest and how we can respond to the questions, the engagement that our audience has really shown to this webinar. And we will definitely get back to all of you, and you will be sent a recording of this webinar as well. So I just have an announcement for next Wednesday, as this is a series, and there were some questions about transnational education that we have received this week. And we kept them actually because our next webinar, next Wednesday, same time, is on the future of transnational education. And we have a very prestigious panel next week again, including Professor Sir Steve Smith, who was just appointed as the UK's International Education Champion. And we will have voices from Exeter University, Manchester Metropolitan, and we will have Ada University from Azerbaijan. So keep, I think, following the higher education dialogue series. I think in the absence of face-to-face Higher education engagement, this is really a way of talking about shared problems and coming up with common solutions. I'd like to thank everyone and have a nice day.